So what we're going to do now, I don't know if you noticed there's a little bit of a sofa vibe going on this side of the stage, but I'm going to welcome up Vanessa Vallely, because actually, Vanessa, I know that you have agreed to stand in at very short notice. If you would please come, ladies and gentlemen, Vanessa Vallely, because we're going to, exactly, here she is. I'm loving the music, by the way. Is there a playlist? Is there going to be a playlist? There's a grab a sofa. So
Is it here?
Yeah, do. So we're going to, in each of these sessions, I love this programme, by the way, because it does dive into each of these areas. We're hearing, and will be hearing, about people's personal experiences in each of these areas around data, sponsorship, mentorship, allyship, and really driving change. And I wonder whether we could start with you, just thinking about sponsorship and mentorship particularly. But I want to hear from the audience first.
Yep.
Because I'm really curious to know. So if you ask all of you please to lift your devices and turn to Slido, because I'm going to make live a question, which is how many of the women in the room work for companies where there is a formal sponsorship program? And as we're having our discussion, we'll let those results come in. And I've got one more question after this as well, so keep your devices to hand. But yeah, so I mean, the research has stated that 6 in 10 women have benefited from mentoring, but only 1 in 5 have had access. And then also 49% of those surveyed were aware of sponsorship. And those who had a sponsor said it had a huge impact as well. So I'm really curious to hear about your background, if you would. Tell me a bit about your background, and then also whether or not you benefited from mentors or coaches in your career.
Okay. So firstly, I want to wish Josie from BT better, who is supposed to be doing this session. Obviously, I'm your stand-in. So did I benefit? So my own kind of career background, I said earlier on, 25 years, 9 different banks and investment managers. I think I held in total 28 different tech roles. I had an amazing sponsor that I worked for that used to throw me into departments that I knew nothing about and just hoped that I had the gumption to work out what I was doing. But although that was scary, it was actually stretch roles. There was opportunities for me to grow a different network, to do new things. And the greatest thing about that was to know that he was there to pick me up if I failed in any way. So permission to fail, I think, was really, really important. So I wouldn't so much say that it was a formal sponsorship. He was just a male ally that wanted to see me succeed. I was the only woman in his senior leadership team. And I think, you know, he took it on himself to make me a role model. So then that way, other women would potentially follow.
And when we talk about, so that's quite informal sponsorship, and quite often people go, actually, my sponsors don't really necessarily know that they're a sponsor in some ways. And I think that example, he clearly sort of felt it very keenly. You know, when you think about the more formal approaches, what does good sponsorship look like to you?
So off the back of the research that we did with Ipsos Mori and Tech Talent Charter, we had a number of focus groups. There are 40,000 community members of We Are Tech Women. And we didn't just take verbatim what came out in the research. We wanted to actually get underneath kind of what were some of the issues. And when we talked about sponsorship, we kind of asked the question around what good looks like. So, and things come out like just clearing space for someone in a meeting, you know, just ensuring that the quietest voice, and it doesn't necessarily always have to be a woman, women could be introverted individuals, but just clearing space to make sure that quiet voice is heard. To make sure that if somebody comes up with an idea, they're talked over, and all of a sudden someone else says it, and it's gold. I think we've all been there. You know, that you catch that. You know, you call that out. Hold on, wasn't you just saying something about that? So it's things like that, but it's also taking time out to get to know someone's story. And we mentioned it earlier on about sharing people's stories on SharePoints, external providers. You know, we share loads of different stories of women and men in tech. But just giving that personal kind of PR to people, but getting to the time to know their stories so that you can throw somebody's name into a hat in the room. And I think the best one, Julia, if I may, was a gentleman that I worked with. And he took it personally that he wanted to see more women in the organisation. He had a couple of kind of women at the middle level. And he said, I'm going to take these 3 women kind of under my wing from a sponsorship perspective. And he took them to his meetings and he said, these ladies are just going to listen in. And his senior leadership team didn't quite know what to make of it. But they sat there and they listened in. He made them introduce themselves. He made them tell what their experience was and their stories. He opened up an immediate door of opportunity just by those women being in the room. He then gave them examples of his work, saying, I need to go into a meeting. Here's some papers that I need to read to make an informed decision. You guys brainstorm that. No wrong or right answers. Next time, tell me what you would have done. He showed them what it was like to go and live in his shoes. And the best thing was his senior leadership team thought, why are we not doing that? So they began to pick up the habit as well. And then cohorts of these senior men that were being allies in sponsorship would meet and share stories of the women that they were mentoring and sponsoring, thus opening up doors of opportunity for other opportunities within the organisation. Now, for those of you in the room, that costs nothing. Nothing. No budget, nothing. Easy things to do. But not just men, we as women can do that for each other as well. Everyone can open up a door of opportunity for someone else, a youngster, someone new in the organisation. But that, to me, is what good sponsorship looks like.
Yeah, it's a really inspiring story, isn't it? And also, as you say, the knock-on effects to others around the table are wondering why they should not be doing that themselves as well. I wonder if we could just turn to the Slido result. The question was, how many of the women in the room work for companies where there is a formal sponsorship programme? 53% said, my company does not have a formal sponsorship programme. 16% said there is one, but I'm not part of it. And 32% said there is a formal sponsorship programme. Do those numbers surprise you?
No, and this is the thing, and this is a problem that we have as well, and it goes the same with coaching. You only tend to get that stuff when you get to a certain level. So like when I become more senior in my role, I got the coach, I got the network that was brought to me off the back of my job, off the back of who my boss was. So everything kind of gets... And again, for the senior women in the room, it doesn't get handed to you in a spoon because it comes with its trials and its tribulations. But that side of things kind of becomes a little bit easier. So that's, I think, where we're missing a trick. There was one organisation I heard of a couple of weeks ago that have on-site coaches, that have that anybody at any level can go in when they've got a decision or a quandary around their career, confidentially, and talk to that coach. How many people, I wonder, has that coach stopped from walking out the door? Just by having that on-site, or have that people come in. One of the reasons today that we've got these on-site coaches is not just to retain you, but so that you can drop in and have that conversation if it's not available to you at your level within your organisation. So I think that's something we need to look at. What are we doing at the top that we're not doing at the middle, which is the massively sticky layer that we find ourselves in? So,
and that's where people often are thinking about, how do I get to the next level? How do I take the next step? How do I move up? And how do I navigate challenging and often difficult conversations? Yeah. Because that's life as a leader and as an aspiring leader as well. I'm going to open up another question, actually, for the audience, if you would. I would be curious to know, as I open it up on Slido, is how many of you believe that having a sponsor would accelerate your career pathways? So we'll let that just settle for a bit. We'll return to that in a second. But what I'd love to know is your thoughts about what do companies get wrong when they set up some of these programs?
I think they're looking at it from a more equality rather than an equity standpoint. I don't think they're looking at the individual needs of some of these women, or they put women through a program thinking it's a one-size-fits-all approach. So, and I think sometimes, as much as you can do matching with people, you're doing matching on a piece of paper. It's about chemistry. So I think sometimes opening up an opportunity for individuals to network and to build relationships themselves, to have that connection and go, do you know something, there's something you can teach me, and then to wrap a framework around that of how you approach that mentor and that mentorship goes. So I think more opportunities for people to connect, rather than people sitting in their ivory towers, and you can shoot me down for saying it, and saying, this is how we're going to do a mentoring programme. And verbatim, that's kind of how it is. Yeah. So I think more thought needs to go into it. Yeah. And again, not just mentoring programs. We see a lot of these that are just women only. You know, if we keep talking about women's issues in rooms full of women, we're not going to solve the problem.
And it's really interesting hearing you say that, because I interview lots of very senior people, and they talk about culture really matters. Yep. But, and curiosity really matters, and that's the culture that people want to foster. But if people are introducing one-size-fits-all sponsorship, that completely goes against the grain of having a curious culture of support, where people are just going, this is the way that we do things around here, rather than really thinking, because the third thing that everybody talks about is client centricity. So actually, everybody's human, everybody's individual. They need different models as they come through.
So Julia, just on that point, I know, and it may be something that comes up in a question, because I know we've got to wrap up. But people say, how do I access sponsors? And that's really difficult, because if you're not in the line of sight of an individual that sees your work every day, that sees your capability, how do they put their integrity on the line for you when they're trying to open up a door of opportunity? So that's the bit that we need to go back to when we're designing sponsorship programs. How do these senior sponsors get visibility of the talent in the first place so that they're willing to advocate for them? So I think that's where some more thought needs to go into kind of around different sponsorship programs. It's all well and good if I've got access to a senior individual. Would I say, would you be my sponsor? I would ask that question if I know you've seen enough about me and you think I'm good enough. But it isn't something that you necessarily go and just go, will you be my sponsor? A mental conversation is easier had that way.
Yeah, and I wonder whether that's some of the stuff we could take into the table discussions later on to kind of think about that. Let me return to the audience response to the question about how many of you believe that having a sponsor would accelerate your career, and I'm not at all surprised by this, 97%. 97%. So clearly this is seen to be prescient, important, and we'll be certainly considering that as we go into the discussion. We are very sorry that Josie Long couldn't join us today from BT. But you're very gracious to step in. Vanessa is the queen of any insights on sponsorship and mentorship anyway. So if you want to pick her brains later, I know you'd be delighted. I say that. I have a deep sense that you would be, even though I set you up for it. Ladies and gentlemen, Vanessa Vallely, thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Vanessa. Cheers.